I think personally, I think they've separated their professional lives, but I think what's really a great problem for them now, as of
What makes this story volatile is not the number itself, it is what that number represents. Because once a public figure's entire brand depends on a carefully managed life story, even a basic detail like age stops being trivial. It becomes a test. Either the timeline is solid, or the timeline has been curated. And according to Tom Bower's reporting, that is exactly the problem surrounding Meghan Markle. Before getting into the claims, it helps to understand why Bower's name carries weight in this conversation. He is not a random tabloid voice chasing traffic for a weekend headline. He built his reputation on aggressive investigative biographies, the kind that rely on interviews, document trails, archived material, and years of reporting. In 2022, he published Revenge: Meghan, Harry, and the War Between the Windsors, a book that presented Meghan as highly strategic, highly controlled, and deeply invested in shaping how the world sees her. And buried inside that larger portrait was a more specific question, not about palace drama, not about family feuds, about chronology. Because Bower's argument is not simply that Meghan polished her image. His argument is that key parts of her biography may not line up the way the public has been told. The official birth date, long associated with Meghan, is August 4th, 1981. That is the accepted version. But Bower points to material he says raises doubts about whether that timeline is accurate. And the reason this claim gained traction is that he did not frame it as gossip. He framed it as a pattern. One of the most talked about pieces of evidence is a 1997 issue of 17 magazine. According to Bower's reporting, the magazine identified Meghan as 21 years old. If the 1981 birth year is correct, that would not just be slightly off, it would be way off. She would have been in her mid-teens at the time, not 21. That alone does not prove anything. Publications make mistakes. Profiles get details wrong. But Bower's point is that this is not being presented as a single typo floating in isolation. He says he verified the issue through archives and treated it as one clue inside a larger chain of inconsistencies. Then there is the entertainment industry angle. Bower also drew attention to claims that Meghan's IMDb information at one point reflected a different birth year, reportedly 1977 rather than 1981. In Hollywood, age is never just a personal detail. It affects casting, marketability, and how long someone can plausibly compete for certain roles. So if conflicting dates appeared in professional profiles, Bower's implication is obvious. This would not be random confusion. It would suggest active image management. From there, the story shifts to Northwestern University, where Meghan graduated in 2003. On paper, the standard timeline looks straightforward, but Bower's reporting reportedly went beyond official graduation data and into the social context around it, including classmates, alumni material, and people who knew her during that period. The argument he builds is less about one definitive document and more about whether Meghan seemed aligned with the age group publicly associated with her. That distinction matters, because this is where the story stops being about a missing piece of paperwork and becomes a credibility issue. Bower's case depends on accumulation, archived magazine references, professional listings, recollections from people connected to different parts of her life. None of that by itself closes the case. But taken together, he argues, it creates enough friction to challenge the official narrative. The family angle makes that tension even sharper. According to the source material, Bower also interviewed Thomas Markle and Samantha Markle while researching Meghan's background. And in this version of the story, what stands out is not a dramatic confession. It is hesitation. The suggestion is that when questions about Meghan's birth year surfaced, the answers were less direct than you would expect for something so basic. That ambiguity becomes part of the intrigue Bower is trying to build. Not because hesitation equals guilt, but because uncertainty around a foundational fact only invites more scrutiny. And that is really the operating logic of this entire controversy. Every unexplained gap makes the next question feel more reasonable. The source also ties this to Meghan's acting career. If the accepted birth year is accurate, her career trajectory looks like one version of a familiar Hollywood grind. If it is not, the same timeline can be read very differently. Suddenly, the years before Suits start to look less like an ordinary slow climb and more like someone trying to stay viable inside an industry that is notoriously unforgiving about age. That interpretation is central to Bauer's portrait of Meghan as someone constantly managing presentation, position, and perception. Then the story moves into more sensitive territory: official documents. One of the claims highlighted in the source concerns the amendment made to Archie's birth certificate, where Meghan's given names were reportedly removed in favor of her royal title. The source frames this as highly unusual and presents Bauer's interpretation that changes like that matter because official names create paper trails. Cross-reference enough records, and contradictions become easier to detect. That theory is part of what makes the allegation feel bigger than celebrity gossip. It suggests not just image control, but defensive image control. Still, this is where careful framing matters. Interpretation is not proof. Suspicion is not documentation. And some of the more explosive claims attached to this subject, especially those involving legal consequences or rumors about an older child, remain just that: claims and rumors, not established facts. A stronger script does not need to overreach there. In fact, overreaching weakens the whole narrative, because the real story is already potent enough without trying to force a verdict.
I think the palace and the machinery of the monarchy needs to take Harry and Meghan more seriously and make sure that Harry and Meghan's antics don't impact the future.
What Bauer appears to be arguing is that Meghan's public identity may have been constructed with extraordinary discipline, and that age is simply the easiest place to spot the seams. Not the whole deception, in his view, just the most measurable one. The one that turns vague suspicion into a question people can actually test against records, dates, and timelines. That is why the response matters almost as much as the allegation. According to the source material, Meghan's side pushed back hard against these claims, describing them as baseless and defamatory. But public denial only goes so far when the underlying issue is trust. Once a figure becomes polarizing enough, silence looks strategic to critics and dignity to supporters. The same reaction gets read in opposite ways. And that is why this story keeps circulating. Not because the public is obsessed with a birthday, because biography is power. In Meghan's case, her story has always done more than describe her. It has helped define her role in the culture. Outsider, self-made striver, actress, humanitarian, royal disruptor, modernizer, victim, survivor, depending on who is telling it. If the foundation beneath that story is unstable, then people start revisiting everything built on top of it. That does not automatically prove Bauer right. It does explain why his reporting landed the way it did. At the center of all this is a simple but uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the most important conflict here is not over one date, but over authorship. Who gets to write Meghan Markle's life story? Meghan herself, through a polished public narrative, or investigators like Bauer, who claim the official version leaves too much out. And that is what gives the controversy its staying power, not the arithmetic alone, the implication behind it. If Bauer is wrong, then this is another case of suspicion feeding on celebrity. But if he is even partly right, then the issue is much larger than age. It becomes a story about reputation built through omission, adjustment, and control. That is why the debate has not gone away. Because once people start believing the timeline may have been managed, they stop treating other inconsistencies as isolated. They start seeing a method. And once that happens, every document, every interview, every revision starts to look less like routine cleanup and more like part of the same design. And that is where this story really lands. Not in one date, not in one document, not even in one allegation. It lands in the gap between image and reality. Because once people start questioning the foundation, they do not stop at the foundation. They start looking at everything built on top of it. The interviews, the branding, the carefully chosen narrative. The version of Meghan Markle the world was asked to accept without looking too closely. That is what makes Tom Bauer's investigation so damaging. It is not just that he raised a question. It is that he raised a question that touches everything else. If the timeline was managed, then what else was managed right along with it? And that is the real danger for Meghan. Public figures can survive criticism. They can survive bad headlines. They can even survive scandal. What is much harder to survive is the feeling that the whole story was manufactured from the start. Because once that doubt gets in, every silence looks deliberate, every correction looks strategic, every missing piece starts to feel like a decision, not an accident. That is how a polished public persona starts to come apart, not all at once, bit by bit, one inconsistency at a time, one unanswered question at a time, until the image that once looked airtight starts showing cracks too obvious to ignore. And maybe that is the biggest takeaway here. This was never just about age. It was about credibility, about control, about whether the woman presented to the world and the woman in the record are actually the same person. That is the question hanging over all of it now. And until there is a clear answer, this story is not going anywhere. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we cut through the PR gloss and get straight to what actually matters, subscribe to BarzBuzz. Because in stories like this, the headline is never the whole story. If this saga had you shook, wait till you see what's next. You already know what it is. BarzBuzz got the real, raw, and unfiltered breakdowns. So don't forget to like, subscribe, drop a comment, and share this with someone who needs to catch up.